Morning, everyone. I'd like to start off by just thanking you all for joining us this morning. And what we will provide you today is a true reflection of the security landscape within business today. HBT have been a WatchGuard Gold partner for the last 10 years, and we currently protect in excess of 20,000 users from IT security vulnerabilities. The pandemic has changed the security landscape. We now not only protect the corporate network office, but we are now protecting users in areas that nobody can control. Home users sit on a network that's shared with domestic products, things like Xboxes, televisions, Alexis, all of which present risks to networks. It's vitally important to manage the security of remote workers, utilising tools and best practice to manage this. What we will do today is demonstrate how unscrupulous organisations steal our information using the dark web. Over the coming weeks, you will have the opportunity to assess your own security vulnerabilities and identify how we can help you protect your organisation and individuals from theft of personal information. What I'd like to do is pass you over to our very own security professional, Mike Penkerval.
Thank you, Rennie, and good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to be able to speak to you this morning. I am what's called a channel account manager with the WatchGuard UK team. And it'll be my opportunity to go through for you this morning some of the data that we have as a result of working with many clients, some surveys we've undertaken, and general news as to how we've seen what we call the threat landscape evolve, particularly over the last 6 months, but more in general and trends that we're seeing, and how WatchGuard Solutions and working with partners like HBT can help protect your business environment. Should you wish to, you're free to ask questions as we go along. There's a Q&A panel as part of the tool that we're using today. I'll be happy to address anything that you might have as we go along or at the end of the presentation. So we're going to start with a little bit of data that I've gathered from something called our Internet Security Report. It's produced every 3 months during the course of the year, and it's data that we collect anonymously from those clients that choose to share it with us through the use of our software and our firewalls. And we gather that data to help us evolve the product to make it work better, but also to address the evolving trends that we see in the security threat landscape. And one of the first ones is trying to address that question about it'll never happen to me. So we're a global organization, and the trend that we've seen over the course of the last 3 months in terms of attacks and attempted breaches of networks demonstrates that Europe is not getting away with it. We're seeing, as you can see, about 38% of the global attacks that we see are landing in Europe. We see that move during the course of the year, depending on how opportunistic the attackers are being and what themes they're picking up on. And particularly with the current pandemic, we're seeing some specific trends in there that kind of move around globally, depending on where the pandemic is more prevalent at any given time. So the 38% that we're seeing in Europe is not unusual, as we've been, certainly in terms of the pandemic, one of the largest hit or hardest hit in recent months. And attackers using that news and those understandable threats to try and launch attacks against businesses and steal data. One of the ones that you won't be surprised to see, I'm sure, is with regard to COVID itself. And this news, although it says 8th of April there was an update literally yesterday, which had me include this in here. And it's from an organization called the National Cybersecurity Center, who work in conjunction with a couple other organizations in Europe, and specifically the Department of Homeland in the US, to track the threats as they see them, both from those that are reported to them for forensic analysis afterwards, those that come into nation states and into businesses, so that they can put guidance in place to help protect your business, your users, and indeed our everyday lives as we move more towards the Internet of Things, as Renee mentioned earlier in this presentation. And the massive exploit we've seen, the biggest growth area, is using the COVID-19 situation that we find ourselves in as a theme to launch an attack against a business. And we're going to see how that's used as we work our way through this presentation. What you might not know about malware trying to hit your network currently is what that is formed of in terms of the types of attack that come in. And within WatchGuard's research, we have something called the threat landscape page, which is, I've included the link here, which is an opportunity for you to go and interrogate our data to see the statistics and how they might be appropriate to you. And the statistic that you're looking at on the screen at the moment is specific to the UK. I like to make it specific to my audience. And I ran this literally last night to update the slide this morning. And in the last 30 days alone, 77%, 3/4 of the malware hitting networks, or indeed endpoints, because we gather data from solutions that we put in there as well, is what we call some kind of zero-day attack. Now, what I mean by a zero-day attack is something that is an exploit or trying to exploit a vulnerability within an operating system, within the security systems, that is not patched or indeed not even known. So as we encounter threats and we learn more about them, the time it takes to build a traditional security measure like an update to your antivirus is somewhere in the region of 30 to 45 days, depending on how sophisticated it is. So there is what we call that zero-day window between when we first see it hit the wild and when a security solution is traditionally put in place. So you'll see patches from Microsoft, patches from Apple, patches from other software providers and security providers. And these are patches that are brought in as we see new threats evolve during those that was zero-day window. But at any given time in the past 30 days, we have seen from WatchGuard that 3/4 of those attacks have been never seen before. What's perhaps more of a concern is one of the traditional ways of blocking these attacks or preventing them from getting in or indeed stealing data is we use something called encryption. An encryption to an end user looks like the little padlock symbol that you see when you go web browsing, to say that the connection between me and the destination in which I'm sending data is encrypted and therefore looks like gobbledygook, you know, to anybody that tries to take a look at what's being sent. Now, we introduced that as a way of protecting ourselves, and it's something that for those of you that have been using VPNs either between offices or between your home environment, your remote working environment, and connected to the office, as a way of protecting ourselves. Unfortunately, the bad actors, as we call them, the malicious people that are out there, have started using the same connections and the same encryption methodology to hide what they're doing. So if you don't implement a solution that has the ability to be able to inspect this encrypted traffic, then you're missing 2/3 of the potential threats, or 2/3 of the data inspection that you should be to protect your network and your users. So we need to make sure that we put solutions in place that can inspect that data and do it without impacting the speed at which your network works. One of the other pieces that I wanted to bring to your attention this morning is with regard to a survey we ran with people like you that are attending today and other users that we work with. We did it in conjunction with SC Media Magazine, where we undertook a survey with their readership, with the people that visited their website, to understand what threats you're seeing in the world and hitting your networks, and what style they're taking, and what perhaps is preventing you from being able to protect yourselves. And the results were quite as we would have expected, and you would have expected in the initial part, which is we asked that audience to rate between 0 and 5 what they deem to be the biggest threats to their business in terms of cybersecurity at the moment. And number one, by quite some margin, unsurprisingly, were phishing attempts. Now, just for everybody's benefit, a phishing attempt is one of those emails that you receive either personally or as a business, inviting you to do something like change your password or pay a bill that you weren't expecting. They come from what you consider to be a legitimate source, but they won't be. And this is an example of what was happening in the COVID attacks that the NCSC was seeing. So there were plenty of emails being sent out, both directed at individuals and businesses and into the wild in a kind of scattergun approach, inviting people to do things like book a COVID test or pay for some kind of vaccine or put some kind of protection that, you know, is preying on our insecurities. They're inviting people to follow a link, fill out a form, perhaps pay for a test. And of course, you're not actually buying anything or connecting to an appropriate site at all. They're capturing your credentials. They might ask you to create an account where you create a username and password, and they're capturing all that kind of information to be able to use it against you at a later date. Or indeed, some organizations just capture this information to sell on to other people who want to launch a different kind of attack, such as a ransomware attack, which is still very prevalent out there, and we're still seeing take place, but it's somewhat in the decline. As we see what's more likely to happen, particularly with people who are adopting cloud-based solutions and remote worker solutions, where they're more likely to try and get is what we call the authentication or the credential information. They want to capture your username and password more than anything else. And the reason they want to do this is because we're all human. We use the same password over and over again. Even in my industry, and I've been working in security in excess of 15 years now, there's probably a selection of passwords that I use. They're quite complicated and long, but there's a selection because we can't remember them all. And whilst there are tools out there to help us remember and perhaps store in password managers, there's still an element of reuse. And one of the things we have particularly seen is how people's personal choices in terms of passwords and credentials in social media, in our personal lives, rolls over to that in our business accounts as well. So I suspect everybody who's attending today, panelists and attendees and alike, probably have passwords in things like Facebook and other social media, or indeed peer groups like LinkedIn and other organizations, where the password is the same one you use in a business environment as well. And those systems aren't protected as well as a business system is likely to be. Now, you may have seen things like two-factor authentication, various challenges like the banks use to help protect your username and password, but there's still the most valuable thing that an attacker can capture. Because if they can capture those, they might be able to use it to breach a network in some way, or what's more likely, steal some data. Now, what we also asked the audience was, what's preventing you from being able to protect yourselves against these things at the moment? And unsurprisingly, the two things that stand out here are budget and time, particularly in the current climate that we find ourselves in. Everybody's trying to adopt to a changing environment. Everything's evolving as we get different guidance from the government and other organizations about how we should work these days. But of course, budgets are tighter because, you know, with the current pandemic, everybody's being a little bit more careful about where they spend their money, perhaps pushing projects back using furlough or other financial support schemes. That's making it more difficult to be able to put the appropriate measures in place. I'm pleased to say WatchGuard is has one of the best reputations for value for money in this space. And we work with many organizations, from small organizations, 2 or 5 users, all the way through to multiple thousands, to put the same level of security in place for everybody. We, as our mission statement, one of the things we talk about is enterprise security for small and medium-sized businesses, where we want to take the same kind of security that somebody like a global organization or a bank would put in place and make it available to small businesses in an easy-to-deploy manner to provide the same level of protection as they have. And of course, the other influences that we're seeing in there in terms of the tools and the skills that are available to us is where partners like HPT can bring their experience to bear to help you deploy that security as quickly as possible and in the most appropriate manner, because they have the advantage of having done it for plenty of other customers and indeed their own business, and they can broaden that skill and experience to pair when you choose to deploy a solution as well. And one of the tools that WatchGuard launched most recently is what we call a dark web scanner. And I'd advise everybody who attends today to go and take a look at this. There's a link at the bottom of the page. And indeed, the guys at HBT can do this on your behalf should you wish to. As I mentioned, one of the biggest threats is stealing credentials, is stealing those usernames and passwords. And WatchGuard has brought to bear a tool which our partners have and is available through our website to enable you to be able to run a search based on your company domain name to see if there are usernames and passwords out there in the wild that have already been breached, that have already been captured. You simply enter your domain name and hit the Find Out Now button, and a report will come back to give you some idea of any scale of breaches. It'll provide you with information about what breaches there have been that might have captured information from users within your domain. It'll tell you whether it's captured things like usernames and passwords, but also whether there's any confidential data in there, like credit card details or perhaps some PII type information. So it gives you a quick view on whether or not your organization has perhaps got their user details at risk already. You have the ability to be able to get an incredible amount of detail in there. We won't ever expose a couple of things. The first one is we won't ever expose any of the confidential data, such as passwords or credit card information. We hash it out, so it's a bit like when you get your receipt from the shop, you see a number of hashes and just the last 3 digits, but we'll show you that for things like passwords for your users so that they can see if perhaps that the last 3 digits look like a familiar password that they use that is already in the wild being sold and potentially used to breach your organization. So it's a free tool. Available to help you understand the existing risks that might exist within your business already, and I'd strongly advise you go test it. And one of the other pieces of information, of course, that's changing at the moment is in regard to the way in which we work. I am used to being out on the road. My job is to be out there explaining this kind of information to clients and partners alike. And since the beginning of March, I've been working from home almost constantly, as most organizations have, and the evolving workplace that we've seen. And one of the surveys I saw most recently was how we view and how businesses view this evolving working environment in terms of how it was and how it's likely to be in the future. And the results of this report, as you can see, is that more than 40% of businesses consider that they will never return to the office in the way in which they used to. We're seeing an incredible amount of downsizing of office environments as 2 things have happened. We're seeing business owners and larger conglomerates taking a view where perhaps they didn't have the trust in their employees that they might have had beforehand for working from home. And what we're seeing is that trust is being built up as we're seeing organizations continue to be efficient, continue to provide their workers with the tools that they need in order to continue to do business. But also there was a work-life balance change that's going on as well, where employees are saying, well, if I can work from home, then there's a work-life balance that I can achieve while still delivering what the business expects to me. And organizations like Microsoft and Twitter and some other massive organizations out there have actually said, we're never going to return to the office as we did before. And there are many organizations that are expecting in excess of 50% of their employees to work from home forever now. And one of the other pieces that we're seeing is this regard to downsizing of offices. Now, there are two kind of themes that we're seeing in there. The first one is many organizations felt that they needed to have an office in one of the business parks, in one of the city centers, in order to be able to do what they needed to do to conduct business in the normal way. But that has gone down massively, as we've all seen those empty car parks around business parks as more and more users are working from home. And as you can see, this was a report by one of the capital companies, one of the finance companies, that are suggesting that of those surveyed, nearly 3/4 of the decision makers felt like they were either going to downsize their office in order to save money, or perhaps move out of those traditional parks because they don't need the facilities that were there before. So combine that with the likes of those shared office environments, where they've seen a 72% drop in terms of businesses that are taking temporary space or just those smaller offices within the larger multi-site environments. But what we don't want to do is compromise the security that we already have. We need to keep the security in place to protect ourselves against those threats that I mentioned, even though we might be downsizing. So downsizing does not mean that I have to downsize the security that I've got in place as well. And what are the risks that we expect and that we see as we have this mobile or remote working environment for users now? And there are really these key points I wanted to draw out. The first one is expose company devices. When a device is on your network in the office, there's traditional security measures in place beyond the regular endpoint security AV type solution that you might have had. There'll be firewalls, there'll be other security measures on the network to make sure that the data is kept inside and is secure and prevent those malicious actors from trying to get in to attack it or capture it. Now that these corporate devices are off network in home environments, in remote worker environments, those security measures aren't in place in the way that they used to be. So we need to be careful about those. As I mentioned, weak passwords is one of the best ways for an attacker to be able to breach a network, particularly when we reuse them so often. But we shouldn't forget about public Wi-Fi environments as well. Those who are having to go and work from a public environment as we have achieved this work-life balance are also at risk of poor Wi-Fi security, where potentially data can be scraped over the Wi-Fi before it's sent on to the destination, whether it be a cloud-based service or indeed the office. And things like VPNs and other security measures that we put in place can help with that. But we need to be extra careful around those credentials, and particularly with how we protect that remote connection to make them as secure as possible. Now, what we traditionally do and what we had in our offices before is a firewall of some manufacturer. That's a picture of one of ours. We call them fireboxes, and they have to go through what we call layers of defense. They go through the traditional measures of being able to stop people from going to websites that they shouldn't, or indeed going to websites that were newly created last night as a result of a phishing attempt. But we also had intelligent kind of protection in place on a firebox or any firewall to be able to deal with those zero-day threats as we saw them before. But of course, those protection measures aren't in place in the traditional way as we move out of the office. So one of the things that we've looked at doing there is just strengthening the ability to be able to remote connect to the office, and moves more and more of the protection to be user-based and endpoint-based. But a layered approach will always be the best way of dealing with these threats. How do we deal with those downsized offices? Well, the great thing about WatchGuard is the security that we apply is available throughout the range. It's exactly the same whether you go for the baby box at the top here, which is designed for 2 to 5 users, all the way down to our largest appliance down here for multi-thousands of users. The same level of security is available throughout the range. These boxes are a bit like faster engines in your car to be able to deal with more and more traffic. We also have virtual firewalls available and cloud-based firewalls that are available as well to enhance that remote connectivity for remote users whilst not compromising the security that's in place. The security measures that we run on these firewalls, beyond the traditional security such as antivirus and web filtering, are dealing with those zero-day threats that we've been talking about. So things like APT blocker, which is a sandboxing style technology to run a file before it runs on your endpoint to see what happens before you use it, or a way of being able to detect those zero-day threats without having security signatures in place. And these are called next generation security measures. The likes of DNS Watch down in the bottom right-hand corner there is specifically redirecting all calls to websites or all calls to any internet-based destination to see if the destination is a safe place in which to go. Because not everything has been categorized. In the case of a phishing email, if you received something from the bank or looked like it came from the bank last night that says, we understand that some of our users perhaps were put at risk and we're inviting everybody to renew their password, what happens is a malicious actor will create a website literally moments before sending out the phishing attempt so that it's not yet categorized. So traditional web security measures won't work. DNS will see that that was only created last night and it doesn't have a reputation as yet, and perhaps put the appropriate measures in place to stop the user from going there. And the way our DNS service works is we're about continual education as well, because one of the measures you might have put in place while users were still in office environments is some kind of cybersecurity training. You might have used some of the tools that are out there to run simulated phishing campaigns within a business to help educate them what a malicious email might look like. But these aren't easily done anymore as we've got a more remote workforce. So one of the benefits of DNS Watch, for example, is that as well as protecting and blocking those sites, a pop-up comes and says, oops, I think you might have connected to a malicious website, perhaps clicked on a phishing link. Perhaps you'd like to watch this 5-minute video to help you recognize what a phishing attack looks like and how to protect yourself next time. So we're reinforcing the learning every time we go to try and help educate users and protect our businesses against those zero-day threats. Now, all of this is almost useless without having some kind of visibility and reporting. And one of the key benefits of WatchGuard devices is our cloud reporting engine. For those businesses that are involved in things like PCI compliance or perhaps HIPAA around healthcare, one of the things you want to be able to do is produce instantaneous reports about what's going on with your users and your remote workers. And WatchGuard devices have access to our WatchGuard cloud environment to provide you with in excess of 100 reports and dashboards to be able to examine that data. Now, one of the great things about working with a partner such as HPT is their ability to interpret the data that's there and these reports to help you enforce and improve your security as you go along as the evolving workforce changes. So we really want to see those reports used on a constantly evolving process to be able to make sure that your security posture to protect your business and protect your users is constantly evolving. And that's where a partner like HPT can provide real added value. But as I said, 90% of all attacks start with a phish. There's a reason it's number one on the surveys. There's a reason it's number one in terms of the National Security Cyber Report. And they kind of fall into these three areas. They're what we call happy clickers, those who won't look before clicking on a link in an email or a post that's sent to them by their friend. There's the spear phishing, which targets specific individuals, usually to extort some money, have them pay a bill, make a payment against an invoice to an incorrect bank account, or indeed things like CEO fraud, where they're trying to capture intellectual property or business sensitive information. And there's a reason for that, because of how valuable that information is and the resale value. So one of the things that WatchGuard evolved prior to the pandemic, as we saw this on a trend from our internet security reports, but has become so much more important and prevalent under these conditions that we find ourselves, is extending that protection to users when they're off network. So you might have sent a bulk of your workforce home with laptops or other devices to work from home, but you can't currently enforce where they go to, what websites they visit and what connections they make without some kind of detection on the endpoint. And this is where our product DNS Watch Go provides additional security. It's a tiny little application that sits on the endpoint that enforces some of those firewall security measures to make sure that users aren't going to websites that they shouldn't, as well as protecting users from clicking on those malicious links within phishing attempts. But we typically see the reason for doing these is about stealing usernames and passwords, and this has been a running theme through this presentation, as I'm sure you will have realized. The number one thing they're trying to get is your password, preferably your username as well, or if they get it the other way around, they'll try and do something like what we call a brute force attack, which is where they run dictionaries of common passwords, millions and millions of different combinations against a known username, as a way of trying to breach into a network. So we need to be able to reinforce that security around the password. And the way to do that is something called multi-factor authentication. So WatchGuard offer a tool called AuthPoint. It sits on a smartphone. It can be a physical device should you wish to. And it's a way of being able to protect your users every time they log on to both your network, but also cloud-based applications. Unsurprisingly, I think everybody will realize this as soon as I say it, but of those 90% of breaches, the vast proportion have been directed at tools like Office 365 first. Because as the cloud services provide us with better remote tools and without having to load up our laptops and deliver more and more information from within our networks, they're using cloud tools to enable remote working. But those cloud tools all need usernames and passwords with which to log in. Now we simplify it by integrating with things like Office 365 and with perhaps something called Active Directory, their internal network, to be able to use the same username and password over and over again. But the risk in doing that is if it's breached once, we're breaching all of the tools with which it connects. Now AuthPoint is a tool that enables you to be able to prove the user is who they say they are. From a user experience, it's very simple. It's just like we do with our banks, and we have been doing for many years. Say you fire up your laptop and you need to connect to the office or some cloud-based tool, then you get a pop-up that says, please type in your username and password. And if you integrate AuthPoint with it, you will get a message to your phone saying, are you trying to log in from this location using this type of machine at this time? And you simply say yes or no. And if you say yes, you're passed through. If you say no, it denies the connection, which perhaps is somebody else trying to use your username and credentials, and alerts your IT admin or your partner of choice that somebody is trying to use username and credentials that they shouldn't be. So you can take appropriate remedial action. And one of the great tools that comes in AuthPoint that I've seen used more and more is the ability to have a single sign-on experience. So now you can browse to a website, use your usual username and password in combination with multi-factor authentication from WatchGuard to be able to land on what we call a portal, which is a jump-off point to those cloud services and internal services that your users need to do to be able to conduct business whilst off network. It's a great tool. It's massively cost effective. Like every time I'm out there with clients, I talk about it being less than a cup of coffee when we were allowed to go out and buy such things per user per year. So it's a really, really great tool for you to be able to implement that will address, as we've seen, over 90% of those breaches. So by means of a quick summary, there are a couple of points here that I'd like you to take away from this session this morning. The first one is, and normally I award points when I'm in front of people doing this presentation. If you recognize where that pictures came from, welcome to put it in the Q&A section. But downsizing your office does not have to mean downsizing your security. As you've seen, our appliances come from very small to very large, but the same level of security is available across the entire range at a very cost-efficient price. Think user security, not device security. We're all about encrypting devices, making sure they got usernames and passwords on them. But as we've seen, what we need to think about is what the user needs to do in order to be able to do their job appropriately. So we need to think about how the user works and how we can put security measures that don't inhibit them from doing their job, but do secure the data and do secure the passwords that they're using as they work remotely. And finally, work with an expert. This is why I do this 2 or 3 times a week with different partners. But HBT, as we said, a gold partner with WatchGuard, worked with us for 10 years. They're highly experienced in deploying these security measures quickly and efficiently, and bringing to bear the benefits and experience they've had with working with other organizations to help you deploy this as quickly and as efficiently and cost effectively as possible. So with that, I'll hand back to Renee to see if there are any questions. I hope you found this is useful this morning, and we're here to help should you need anything afterwards.
Thanks very much, Mike. That was a real insight into the security landscape as it stands at the moment, certainly under the times we're in today. We have got a couple of questions.
Okay.
There's one common theme, and that is how can the companies have asked this question is how can they find out if an employee's credentials are exposed on the dark web?
Okay, so that would be using that dark web scanning tool that I mentioned in one of the earlier slides. If I just flip back a moment ago. So if our users get in contact with you or follow the link at the bottom of that page, they simply pop in the sony.com or acme.org.uk in here, hit find out now, and a pop-up page will come showing them some measure of the report. If they'd like further detail, there's an opportunity to go request it afterwards, and you can provide it as HBT, or they can receive it directly about what breaches of user information are already out there in the wild.
So the best thing is for us to make contact with those of you that have asked that question, and for any others that would like that scan done, and we can take you through that process. The other question is centers around really trials and promotions.
Try before you buy. Yeah.
Because, and I think looking at the questions that have been asked, this is largely centered around how does a company know whether they are exposed in any way, shape or form in terms of that they have a security measure in place. There's always that doubt whether it's actually providing the level of security because there's a lack of understanding at what level that needs to be. So how can a business find out whether they need to extend that security level or not?
Of course. So in the case of our firewalls, they're available on trials. They're typically 2-week trials. They can be 30-day trials where you can take an appliance at no cost to the business, implement it alongside what you already have or in place of what you already have, and benefit from those cloud-based reports to give you an idea about what normal looks like on a network, what potential attacks are taking place, and how you might be able to better protect yourself. There's absolutely no cost associated with that. We're very happy to make them available should people wish to. Obviously, deploying them can require a little bit of help, and that's where you guys can get involved.
Absolutely.
In the case of the remote user services, such as the multi-factor authentication and DNS service, and more recently, our AD360, our endpoint antivirus and EDR solution. All of those are available on free trials. We offer 30 and 60-day trials for a number of users at absolutely no cost.
Okay, that's fantastic, Mike. Well, that levels off the questions that we've had. If there isn't anything else that anybody needs, I just want to thank you all for attending today. I hope you all found it useful. We will make all the slide deck available to everybody that's attended today, and if you need any further information or you want to expand on any of the things that Mike has discussed within the presentation, then please don't hesitate to contact us.
Thank you, Renee, and thank you, HBT, for the invite.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
You're welcome.